Can start, I believe. Yes, first of all, the event is being recorded now, just to let you know. And good afternoon. Welcome all to the book launch series that we have been organizing for a while under the PSA Turkish Politics Specialist Group. My name is Buğra Güngör. I will be moderating the conversation today. I am a research fellow in the Department of International Relations and Political Science at the Geneva Graduate Institute in Switzerland. I'm also one of the co-conveners of this specialist group, along with my colleague, Dr. Begüm Zorlu. Besides, Begüm and I are closely collaborating with Dr. Seçkin Sertdemir from LSE as the events officer of this committee, and Dr. Özlem Kayhan Pusane from Işık University as the international officer of our committee. We collectively organize these events. Today, the book launch event will be based on Dr. Spyros Sofos' latest book titled Turkish Politics and the People, Mass Mobilization and Populism, published last year by Edinburgh University Press under Edinburgh Studies on Modern Turkey. In this respect, I'd like to share with you a short bio of Dr. Sofos. Spyros Sofos is a political sociologist and a visiting senior fellow at the Middle East Center of the London School of Economics in UK. His research focuses on issues of conflict, polarization, societal insecurity, and political identity formation, and more recently on political contestation, populism, and nationalism. He has explored these issues with regard to Turkey, Southeast Europe, Western Europe, and the Middle East. Other than his latest book that we will be discussing shortly, he has also co-authored Islam in Europe, Public Spaces and Civic Networks, published by Palgrave in 2013, and Tormented by History, Nationalism in Greece and Turkey, published by Hurst and Oxford University Press in 2008. Spyros is also the lead editor of #Rethinking Populism. In this event, we also have two discussants. First, Evren Balta, professor and chair in the Department of International Relations at Özyeğin University in Istanbul, and Toygar Sinan Baykan, an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at Kirklareli University in Turkey. They kindly agreed to discuss Spyros' brand new book. Here is the plan. The first 15 minutes will be devoted to Spyros' presentation. It will be followed by discussant comments in 20 minutes, 10 minutes per discussant. Next, Spyros will have 5 to 10 minutes to respond to those comments. Finally, we will open the floor for collective discussion or Q&A, and we aim to finish the event in 1 hour. Without further ado, Spyros, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the PSA Turkish Politics Specialist Group for dedicating this time to discussion of my book. I'm very grateful. I'm also very grateful to the discussants who very kindly offered to be here today, and to Buğra, the chair of this event, and of course to everybody else who is attending. But I will move very quickly to sharing my PowerPoint, as I am very aware that time is short. So I would like to first of all start by giving a little bit of a background of the thinking behind the book in many ways. So the first I would say motivation for writing this book had to do with my engagement with discussions on populism, and my opinion that populism has become a catch-all term, so much so that it runs a danger of losing its critical edge and value. I think there has been so much written about it, and so many phenomena described as populist that quite often we don't find the notion really critically useful in research. The second had to do with earlier literature on Islamist movements that also tried to understand developments in Turkey on the basis of Islam and Islamism. And I think this has quite often looked at the wrong place, effectively, looking at Islam instead of looking at the dynamics of Turkish society, taking into account Islam, but not focusing only on it. So in terms of what this book brings, I think, to the discussion is a more nuanced understanding of the popular. In the book, I distinguish between plebeian mobilizations and subjectivities. On the one hand, like the Gezi events, I dedicate almost a chapter in the book on that. And on the other hand, more state-focused, homogenizing populist projects, like I would say the populism that is associated with Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The second important, in my opinion, contribution of the book is the genealogical approach. It looks at populism also by looking, delving into the past of a society. It seeks to uncover discursive traditions that are central in the construction of the people, in Turkish politics in this case, over the last 100 years, and how these have informed collective memory, even corporeal memory in many ways, political culture and the institutional architecture of contemporary Turkey. The last point is that it proposes ways of reading the mobilization of the abstract people as the bearer of rights in contemporary Turkey, but also beyond. It is a central argument that populism institutes the people as the bearer of rights instead of individuals, particular groups, and so on. Moving to the content of the book, I would argue that I identify in the book actually the people and the nation as foundational elements, discursive elements of the Turkish Republic and of Turkish politics. This happens at a time when the Ottoman Empire implodes, and the elite of the empire primarily is facing what is in the literature mentioned as ontological insecurity. They are searching for an alternative political architecture and an alternative context of politics for the post-imperial era. And in this process, Republican nationalism assumes an anti-colonial, I would say, character. It presents itself as anti-colonial, as a liberation from the empire, from the Ottoman Empire, although a lot of the evils, I would say, that had fallen upon the population of Anatolia and other parts of the empire quite often were associated with the progenitors of the Republican project, the various nationalist circles in the empire. In this process, and through this anti-colonial discourse, the people's enemies are becoming constitutive others. They are becoming effectively the points of reference through which the people who is suffering and needs liberation in many ways is defined. And in this process, the plebeian narratives, the narratives of ordinary people, their complaints and laments quite often about the war that had led to the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, are translated into narratives of nationalist narratives, narratives of the Republican nation. The book, of course, does this in much detail, but here I have to be quite brief. So I would say that in the process of establishing modern Turkey, there have been some discursive inconsistencies with regards to the people and the nation and their definition. First, and this is not uncommon in most nationalisms, the elite that undertakes the Republican project exalts a nation that has not yet come into existence. It has to build it. And this is happening through processes of both inclusion, but also multiple exclusions. In an earlier book, Tormented by History, I have argued about the exclusions of minorities. But I also argue that people who identified themselves as Turks, but who did not share the Republican ideal, in many ways have been also at the receiving end of these exclusions. A lot of people have talked about populism as a key element of the Republican project. But it is quite interesting that this is a populism without the people in many ways, because the actual people who were living in the lands that were to become the Republic fell short of what the Republican elite wanted to see, the nation and the people that they wanted to see. And I use the psychoanalytical term of objet petit a of Republican nationalism to talk about effectively this idealized people as opposed to the actual people. I try to document how the people were seen primarily defined as laborers, servants of the country, immature, are not ready yet for democracy, and therefore how the state assumed the role of tutor and civilizer upon the savages of Anatolia, as I say. And in this context, there is no room for particularism, diversity, but what is, I think, central in the discourse of the Republican project is the national popular unity. And in these terms, the sovereignty of the nation in many ways has superseded and has circumscribed the sovereignty of the people who were building this republic. There is an ambient mistrust throughout the early years of the republic towards the people. I have various, I'm trying to document this in the book. I have here two quotations from of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and how he saw the people. As you can see, I won't read them. Mustafa Kemal is talking about leading the people and supporting them and trying to making them ready for democracy. The second one also reminds me very much of Recep Tayyip Erdogan's discourse about the Gezi protesters and the notion of çapulcu that he used as he talks about drunkards and bandits and so on. So I wanted to emphasize this continuity in many ways. I would, in the book, I argue in many ways that the Republic can be seen as purgatory in the sense of Dante's purgatory in his Commedia Divina, as the people that are in the Republic in many ways are not deemed, as I said earlier, worthy of becoming the people of the Republic yet. So they're treated in many ways through regimes of repression and abjection. So there are stories in memoirs about the gendarme in the villages who punished people for not dressing properly or not speaking Turkish. Of course, indoctrination, the halkevleri, the various other campaigns of educating the Turkish population. And at the same time, through a dimension of the state as father, which was for the most part of the early years embodied by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. I have here some photographs of this kind of father figure kind of representations that in many ways dissociated Atatürk from the state that indoctrinated and repressed in many ways. But of course, the father cannot live forever. And so when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk passed away, the Republic faced a legitimation crisis. It hastily moved towards, but hesitantly, towards a multi-party system, which pitted in many ways the state versus the counter elites that tried to forge a different route possibly for the Republic. The mistrust towards the people remained, and therefore we had a frequent interruption of multi-party competition. And this interruption was quite often evoking Atatürk's legacy and the need to maintain national popular unity and protecting the national interest. We have a series of coups d'etat, and we can see that this disruption of democracy in many ways is characteristic of a dual sovereignty, as I call, the sovereignty of the people on one hand and the sovereignty of an abstract nation, these two compete in many ways. This led to weak democratic institutions as democracy was continuously interrupted in many ways and led to a polarization that we recognize even today. And one of the discussants here, Toygar, has talked about it in his excellent book as well. And in many ways, so I will move to the next, to the populist moment. It's a huge leap, but I wanted to talk very quickly about what has happened when the AKP, the party in power at the moment, moved from its initial phase of, as one of the advisors of Erdogan calls, politics of patience to the politics of controlled tension. We can see here elements that have been present throughout the Republic are used by the AKP and Erdogan. For example, the appeal to the national will, the emphasis on the people as a united and homogeneous subject, the idea that the state is continuously in motion that was also present in Kemal Atatürk's principle of inkılapçılık in many ways, the aversion towards liberal democratic institutions, because they were considered to be divisive, and of course the binary view of politics, but with a reversed polarity. The outsiders became insiders in many ways. And now I am going to conclude very quickly by arguing that I suggest that we should see this populist moment in Turkey and elsewhere in many ways by integrating what different theories of populism have done. So identity and discourse, representation and performance, strategy, organization, and leadership. How I do that in the book, I talk in terms of discourse about how discursively the socio-political fissures that have been developing over the past 100 years in Turkey have been activated by the AKP and have been mobilized in many ways in its politics. The process of construction of a sense of injustice among the supporters of the ruling coalition at the moment, and the construction of crises that reproduce the polarization of society. In terms of performative elements, in many ways, I emphasize primarily the street politics that have prevailed. Instead of debating politics in parliament and other institutions, we have these theatrical, organized, huge meetings, demonstrations, plebiscitary interactions with the leader in many ways, and calls to defend democracy in the street. Of course, the utilization of these crowds as proof that democracy is happening in action in many ways. And this is my last slide, to reassure you. So I would argue that also in terms of representation, membership, and leadership, we can see that populism has emphasized national will at the expense of parliamentary liberal democracy. I'm not an enthusiastic supporter of liberal democracy, but I think we need some representative institutions, and I see these being undermined over the past 20 years, and even before, I should say. An emphasis on an indivisible leadership of a united nation. I talked to a lot of people who said that one of the weak points of the table of six and the alliance, or the opposition alliance, was that it didn't manage to show indivisibility of leadership that effectively expressed a united people. It did the opposite. Also externalization of difference. Others are very important in populism in order to define the people. And here I have, I think, one of the central messages that I want to pass across with this book, that in populism, and of course Turkish populism, the citizen is a citizen only once they relinquish their individuality and their particularity. In the official discourse and the dominant discourse, you cannot be a citizen if you do not shed this kind of individual vestiges, and you do not become part of I would say, a mass, the people. And therefore, in this process, the abstract people, who we cannot talk to and we cannot really sense what they think, becomes the bearer of rights, as opposed to individuals, as opposed to particular groups in the society, and so on. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take more than the time allocated to me.
No,
with the discussion.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Spyros. I imagine that summarizing a book within 15 minutes should be a very hard, task. Yet you did a great job. Perfect timing. Thank you very much.
It's a painful task. Yes. Thank you.
I would imagine. And now we will turn to our discussants, Evren and Toygar. Each will have 10 minutes to comment on the book. The floor is yours. Who would like to start first? Maybe Evren, we can start with you.
Sure, of
Perfect.
course. Okay, thanks for inviting me. And I think this is a fascinating book on Turkish history through the concept of the people. And I also do think that it moves through different traditions and modalities of appeals to people since the foundation of the Republic so well. It contributes to the debates not only on populism, but on citizenship. It shows how belonging has changed and how politics and political elites utilize the concept of the people to consolidate their rule, to transform the society, and to signal to the broader population who belongs and who does not. And I do still think that who is the people? I mean, I think that who is the people is still the most crucial debate in Turkish politics, shaping party systems, patterns of citizenship, and institutions of ruling. As Spyros said, the book approaches populism as a concept that almost always have three dimensions, and these are representation, if I'm not getting it wrong, leadership, charismatic leadership, and mobilization. And these three dimensions the book shows almost always interact with the zeitgeist of our times, creating material consequences and shape the life we live and the air we breathe. So I do like the book, the discussion of the book's material consequences as well. What I'm going to be doing, I mean, I have some questions on the book and on the arguments, but what I'm going to be doing here is to focus on the continuity that this book really very well shows. The continuity in the ways in which technologies of rule shape the society, but specifically comparing Republican period and the last 2 decades under the AKP rule, which caused the populist moment. But what I also would like to first say that the book reminded me the concept of Mood, pathological normalcy. And with that concept, Mood argues that populists, and in the case Erdogan and the AKP, bring together many components of past institutional and cultural structures by radicalizing those patterns. I mean, by radicalizing the patterns that are already present in earlier areas. So it's not a difference of kind when we talk about populism or nativism, but he says it's a difference of degree. So this is the first question that I would like to ask. And when comparing it, I'm going to be basically revisiting this idea of pathological normalcy, whether the difference is in a difference of degree or a difference of kind. And Mood also says that while almost all these elements are familiar individually, their combination is always brand new. So they interact with the systemic and structural constraints and opportunities of their time, and they really create a brand new vision of society. But all these pieces, Mood says, are basically already out there. The patterns are already out there. And this familiarity made it easier for society to accept them as normal, native culture. But the result is the radical restructuration of political and social relations. So here are some thoughts that I have on these continuities. The first question I have is this civilizational project that the both Republican period and the populist movement, the last 2 decades, or let me say AKP's project of populism has, these 2 projects. I mean, inherent in both projects is the promise of bringing the repressed, ignored, and neglected people to the center of the statecraft. So as I said, their technology, and as the book says, their technology of ruling is similar. However, each project's notion of desirable and undesirable citizen seems to me is different from one another. And in this sense, I mean, the Republican project is based on a relationship between authentic Turkish people, as the book says, and the Ottoman elites. It has a civilizational aspect, educating, modernizing this authentic people. But AKP's populism is based on an antagonistic relationship, again, between this authentic conservative people versus secular Republican elites. But, and I mean, contrary to the Republican project, it tries to elevate the status of the repressed, representing conservative values that are already in the society. It is not trying to, as the Republican elites, not trying to transform the society as a whole. it is trying to change the power dynamics within the society, it seems to me. And when I'm asking this question, the question that I already have, the analytical that I have in my mind is this analytical distinction between nationalism and populism, and even with nativism. So, for example, for Brubaker, the concept of the people is a part concept, designating one part of a wider political community that is construed as opposed to another part of the community. Whereas the nation designates a political or cultural whole, a culturally bounded community. And you can see this community uncivilized. You want to elevate the community's status altogether. But this does not posit this idea of, like one part of the community against the other part of the community. So I would like to ask whether, this analytical distinction between nationalism and populism holds when we compare Republican period and the populist moment, whether the first period is a more of a nationalist period, although it's still exclusive, it still has a civilized mission, and the last period is a populist moment. And I do think that this is an important distinction, analytical distinction, because it also comes up with a different idea of the nation, and also it requires different modalities of rules. And this is a theoretical debate as well, as we know, like it's an important theoretical debate, how to differentiate populism from nationalism. Another question I have, I know I only have 3 minutes, but I have just two more questions, basically. In the book, there is a debate around anti-Westernism and anti-colonialism. And we do know that both projects have an anti-Western component. We also know that from the book, this vision of anti-Westernism, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism somehow reinforced and utilized by the AKP. But the way that these two projects try to overcome this insecurity seems to be radically different. As the book debates, the first period, the Republican period, is basically about catching up. The second period, the populist moment, is basically about how to say, the AKP dropped the long-held desire of the Turkish elites to catch up with the West and said that we are a natural alternative to the Western culture, no need to catch up with, dropped the bridge metaphor that was widely used by the political elites and this and that. So the question that I have, and I'm also questioning whether post-colonial is the appropriate term for the first Republican period. And for the populist moment, whether we can use the concept of post-imperial and how these two different versions or different types of relationship with the West really structures or shapes the idea of the people and also the state-society relations, or how Turkey envisages itself. Finally, I'll be asking now very quickly. I also have questions about charismatic leadership and whether that's the sustainability of Erdogan's charismatic leadership, but I may ask it later on. The question that I have, the last question I have, is about the role of the religion. In the book, you basically argue that the AKP or the populist movement did not go great lengths to attribute an exclusively Islamic connotation to their constituency, but refer basically to the conservative values and status disparities and this and that. But what I want to ask you is that whether there is this difference between religious politics or religious identities and political religion through its institutionalization of religion, increasing involvement of religious actors in politics. In both contexts, what I see is that the AKP project, if you consider it as a more civilizational project, used religious elements to construct and imagine the people in a way. And also, more than that, institutionalized the political religion in the society, which really reshaped the societal relations in a very antagonistic relationship with the Republican period. So this is the last question that I'm asking. Could you please, I mean, I really wanted to know a bit more about the role of religion in this populist movement and how you think religion or populism attaches itself to this religious element or religious dimension. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Evren. Thank you for your comments and also finishing your part timely. And now we are turning to Toygar. The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to take part in Professor Sofos's book launch, and I would like to thank PSA Specialist Group on Turkish Politics for their invitation. I really enjoyed reading the book, and I think this is a very important enterprise in several respects. First of all, I would like to start by saying that the literature on the nexus between populism and Turkish politics today is an extremely crowded area, and it is really hard to say something novel on this very topic. But at the same time, what I see in the relevant literatures today, especially in English, is that most of them are focusing on contemporary Turkish politics, in which Erdogan's AKP occupies the center stage. And most of these studies are overwhelmingly concerned with conceptual accuracy and operationalization, and usually follow predominant conceptual discussions in the comparative politics scholarship on populism today. In fact, however, I think we also need to acknowledge the importance of the historical, cultural, and social psychological context of the phenomenon of populism. And I think in terms of acknowledging this very context, Turkish politics and the people is making a very important contribution to the scholarly discussion on Turkish populism, especially in the English language. This contribution is very important, especially when it comes to the case of Turkey, because as Professor Sofos elegantly demonstrates in his account, there are some really deep-rooted historical and intellectual causes behind the centrality of populism in this or that form, in more manifest or latent ways in Turkish politics throughout the entire Republican period. First of all, as Professor Sofos asserts, the discussion on populism or halkçılık dates back to the late Ottoman period, and just like Russian Narodnism, and to a certain extent inspired by it. Discussions around populism in Ottoman Turkish history first appeared in the intellectual realm. This aspect of populism is well demonstrated in the literature in Turkish, especially in the works of Zafer Toprak, İlhan Tekeli, and Asım Karaömerlioğlu. Professor Sofos, however, in my view, takes a further step here, and in his book, he tries to demonstrate the nexus between these intellectual discussions, the historical context, and how they informed the political practice of Ottoman Turkish elite in a context of imperial state decline and the emergence of a new nation state. Thus, Turkish politics and the people compellingly illustrates that populism has been part and parcel of the nation-building process in Turkey in the initial decades of the 20th century. The book also provides the reader with a perspective regarding why religious conservative Turkish nationalism in Turkey has always been prone to populism, because, first of all, as Professor Sofos notes, Turkish and Kurdish Muslim populations in the Ottoman Empire had been looked down upon by the Ottoman elites themselves, as well as more urban and relatively wealthier non-Muslim minorities. Hence, the early Republican intellectuals and elites were quick to embrace populist ideas during the foundation of the Republic, since this was in congruence with their reaction to the cosmopolitan Ottoman elites, monarchical past of the country, and relatively wealthier non-Muslim minorities of the empire and the young Turkish Republic. As Professor Sofos aptly defines, Turkish nation was born as an underdog nation, which in the following decades rendered conservative nationalist political movements and parties particularly populist. Professor Sofos also rightly points out that populist ideas in the early Republican period, albeit combined with solidarist corporative views and thoughts, strive to substitute a genuinely competitive democratic politics, because the ontological insecurity inflicted upon the Turkish elite throughout the demise of the empire and the rise of the Turkish Republic made them think that a real competitive politics based on social device is not affordable. This sense of being under constant threat and aggression is perhaps still shaping the psyche of Turkish elites and render them highly suspicious of pluralism and opposition and driving them to different sources of populism. But Turkish politics and the people also draws attention to some of the ironies of the nation-building process in the early Republican period and how this generated a gap between the people and the nation. Because as Professor Sofos demonstrates, during the turmoil of the decline of the empire and the independence war, the Turkish elite realized how underdeveloped were the Anatolian populations and how they were indifferent to the elite's project of constructing a modern nation and a nation state. Thus, the entire early Republican experience, in fact, ironically enough, has turned into an anti-populist civilizing mission aiming at the transformation of peoples into a homogeneous, idealized nation. This very dynamic paved the more conflictual populism of the multi-party era in Turkey, challenging the secular high politics of Kemalist nation builders. Thus, in my opinion, Turkish politics and the people grasps and skillfully presents three constitutive historical dynamics in Turkish politics that makes the phenomenon of populism with authoritarian implications central to Turkish politics today. First of these constitutive dynamics is the elitist and cosmopolitan Ottoman legacy, which initially drove Republican Turkish nationalism to populism. Second of these constitutive dynamics is the ontological insecurity that inflicted a sense of continuous crisis upon the psyche of Turkish elite during the demise of the empire and the national independence war, which resulted in Turkish elites valuing unity over competitive politics and pluralism. And the third constitutive dynamic asserted by Professor Sofos' account is the gap between the people and the nation that emerged during the nation-building processes in the early Republican period, which paved the way to the more conflictual populist politics of the multi-party era. And from a party political perspective, the consequences of all of these dynamics, especially today, are first, we have parties that are not strictly based on social divisions, but each claiming that they are representing the entire nation. Second, we have marked authoritarian tendencies in incumbent parties, viewing opposition parties with deep suspicion. And third, we have the blurred boundaries between the formal and the informal realms due to the resilient sense of continuous crisis among the Turkish elite, which effectively undermined the rule of law in Turkey. In short, almost every feature of a liberal democracy is missing in Turkish politics, and the Turkish politics and the people helps us understand the deep-rooted historical, intellectual, cultural, and social psychological factors facilitating this outcome. Having said all of these, I would also like to point out that the long-term resilience of populist and authoritarian trends in Turkish politics also have something to do with the deeply entrenched patronage networks and clientelistic practices in Turkish politics, and perhaps Professor Sofos could have emphasized this aspect of Turkish politics a bit stronger, because in the absence of ideological and programmatic linkages with their constituencies, Turkish parties and leaders tended to stick to catch-all populist discourses and styles in the context of Turkish competitive politics. Thus, besides intellectual and historical factors, development of Turkish competitive party politics under the influence of a strata of powerful local elites might have consolidated the proclivity to populism in the multi-party era. But since Turkish politics and the people is more on the genealogy of the populist discourses and views, I can understand why Professor Sofos makes an only passing reference to this particular dimension of Turkish politics. I also think that Turkish politics and the people could have benefited more from current debates on anti-populism, because especially in chapters on the early Republican period, what we actually see is a kind of anti-populism in the guise of a civilizing nation-building process. But of course, I should also note that the literature on anti-populism is still developing, and as Professor Sofos notes, there are some weaknesses in the concept that renders it a bit hard to deploy for historical analysis. Finally, I would also like to draw attention to a few expressions in the book that reflects Professor Sofos' conceptual innovativeness and which have very remarkable potential for further elaboration and improvement. Professor Sofos, for example, writes about the infantilizing attitudes of the early Republican elite towards masses. He also talks about the self-colonization efforts in the early Republican period. When it comes to the nation-building processes, he talks about how the degree of assimilability of diverse ethnic groups in the eyes of the Turkish elite had defined their policies towards the people. At some point in the book, Professor Sofos also talks about creative ambiguity exerted by Turkish elites when it came to issues of identity. I think in future works, Professor Sofos can transform these expressions to define certain patterns of behavior that he observed in the Turkish political practice into full-fledged concepts and may contribute significantly to our understanding of Turkish politics, providing us new conceptual tools. I would like to complete my comments with two questions that may perhaps provide Professor Sofos with an opportunity to further elaborate his theoretical position. First of all, I'm wondering how he evaluates current predominant approach to the concept of populism. Can he further elaborate his position on the contemporary definition and theoretical debate on populism? Apart from its contribution to our understanding of Turkish politics, in which ways does Professor Sofos think that his book contributes to these conceptual and theoretical discussions? My second question will be regarding a comparison between populism in Turkey and Greece. We also know that populism in Greece is also a deep-rooted phenomenon dating back at least to the time of PASOK. And there are some really very interesting works produced on populism in Greece during 1980s and 1990s, as well as today on Syriza, mostly by scholars embracing a discourse theoretical perspective. I'm also curious about what does Professor Sofos think about the historical parallels and divergences between the emergence and historical development of populism in Turkey and Greece. This is all I wanted to say, and I would like to thank again organizers for this event and their invitation, and of course to Professor Sofos for the excellent scholarly contribution. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Toygar, for sharing with us your comments and also questions at the end at the same time. Spyros, you have lots of comments and questions, but at the same time you have 7 minutes, only 7 minutes to to reply to those questions, and the floor is yours. You can also pick some of them and further comment depending on your preference.
Thank you very much. I tried to organize my thoughts to address as many points as possible in this time. I would like to thank both of the discussants for very interesting ideas, thoughts, recommendations, and critiques in many ways of my argument. I will start. I would like to start about the element of continuity and rupture in some ways in Turkish politics. Evren's argument that there are distinctions, although there is a continuity in terms of the themes that emerge in political discourse in the early republic and today, and the way that populism operates, there are some distinctions. And I must say I should have emphasized more these distinctions. I think that let me take these points that you raised one by one. First of all, the fact that the late Ottoman elite and Republican elite effectively was trying to catch up, had an anxiety and angst about catching up. I find quite interesting that today also I would say the populist elite, I don't know how to call them, the current elite has also attempted to reposition itself vis-a-vis critiques of its backwardness. I think this is something that has remained constant in Turkish politics, although, as you said, in terms of intensity, it may be different. Because I think that both moments of the establishment of the Republic and of the establishment of the, I would say, populist experiment of the past 2 decades are associated with a sense of imminent exclusion, imminent I would say characterization of the elites as belated, as insufficient. So Erdogan quite frequently has talked about the superiority of the culture that he is exalting, the popular culture, the morality, the conservatism, but also the greatness, that the aspiration of this culture, which in many ways is quite reminiscent of how the Republican elite also tried to identify itself as a modern, not belated, and worthy of consideration internationally. The difference is that Erdogan's view in international terms, but also within the society, is that has to do primarily with not embracing a Westernism, a kind of Western modernism, but attempting to talk about an alternative way, which was also present in, I would say, the Republican project to some extent, but finding a place among the Western nations was much more urgent and important at the time. I think that the element of intensity, if we compare moments, so if we compare the exactly 100 years ago and today, we can see that the intensity perhaps can be identified as similar, because there was an urgency to either get out of the implosion of the Ottoman Empire, and at the same time today of putting an end to any attempt of resurrecting the status quo ante of 20 years ago, and so on. I think that this intensity, of course, has dissipated in between. So, for example, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, perhaps there was not any kind of politics that we could really consider populist, in the sense that we could consider the very early Republican moment and the last 2 decades, I would argue. The distinctions between nationalism and populism are very difficult, I would say, but I can argue that populism is more about, in some ways, binary, transforming the politics into a binary field, into a field of divide and polarization, whereas nationalism is more about, possibly within this binary context, emphasizing the individuality of the nation. We have, for example, populism that social movements have expressed. So, for example, the ecological movement. We have populism that has been expressed by people within a national body without distinguishing themselves in terms of nationality or ethnicity, whereas nationalism obviously revolves around the idea of privileging a nation as a key element in the political arena. Not complete responses, but I think that you know, I have a lot to think about the questions. I would very quickly move to the questions about how I see populism, my conceptualization of populism, and how it contributes to the overall discussion. I think what I'm trying to achieve, and I will try also in subsequent work, is to emphasize that the divide between left and right populism, first of all, is a divide that is very artificial, in the sense that, as I tried to show in the case of Turkish politics, when we look at the people as the bearer of rights, an abstract entity we cannot converse with, we cannot understand what it wants, and so on, because precisely it is not an entity that has one will, or in many ways this is like opening the back door to authoritarian politics. It is like giving permission to specific elites to speak on behalf of the people, and we don't have checks and balances. So be it, for example, Syriza in Greece, or I would say the AKP in Turkey, I think, without trying to equalize the two, I think there are deficiencies in their democratic kind of aspiration. No, the aspiration may be there, at least at the level of discourse, but they are not committed to establishing institutional structures and architectures that can enable the multiplicity of voices within society to express themselves. The second important, so yes, it is establishing the people as the bearer of rights that is highly problematic for me. I don't have a lot of disagreements with most of theories, discursive and organizational and performative, but I think that the key element for me is this. Populism is a kind of technology of governance and identity formation with very tangible material dimensions. And the most important of them is that it negates individual particularistic rights and privileges the rights of an abstract entity such as the people. Very close to Rousseau's, I would say, general will, which also had problems precisely because of their affinity. Very, very quickly now about populism in Greece and Turkey. I think that these societies have sprung out of a long period of cohabitation, or if not osmosis in many ways. And therefore, we have also in Greek political discourse traditions of what is quite often called communalism, which are adverse to the idea of expression of multiplicity of voices. They're emphasizing the importance of a community. We have seen this in politics, but also in culture and art and so on. We've seen how there has been an emphasis on the need to find the authentic voice of a people. So there are many similarities, and actually one of my current projects is to work on Greek populism of the 1980s particularly. So yes, there are similarities. I think the similarities have to do with the fact that the two societies are now two societies, but they used to be one in many ways. There are moral discourses, perceptions of moral economy as opposed to political economy that are very strong also in Greece as in Turkey. And therefore, there is a lot that we can gain from a dialogue between the study of populism in these two societies. I am aware I have not answered all the questions, but I think I would not want to abuse my time. And I want to express my gratitude for the questions, because I will have a lot of work afterwards looking at them and trying to refine my argument. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Spyros, for sharing with us your reactions. And